Okay, welcome to part 2 of motion graphics with After Effects. In this tutorial we're going to look at using After Effects to make things move. So looking at the transform controls that we looked at very briefly in the first tutorial and using things called keyframes. We'll also look a little bit more at the composition settings and how you can change the size and duration of a composition or timeline. And then we'll just look at how you can experiment with different things to do with motion and animating. And then finally we'll just look at saving. The saving isn't exporting, we'll do that in a separate tutorial because it's a little bit more involved. Okay, so just to have a go at animating, I've just made a simple PSD using 2 layers. So we've got a ball and then a background, and named obviously. And then if we go over to After Effects, we just go File, New Project, and then we can go and import, as we did before, the file, the PSD. So going in, ball PSD, doing its composition, retain layer sizes, and away we go, editable layers. Okay. Now, if I just double click that ball, as I did before, you can see the composition opens up as a canvas, and you'll notice this time that it's a different size to what we had before. So just to clarify, when you make a new project in After Effects, it just makes a new project and you don't set the document settings as you would in After Effects. When you import the footage, that determines the size of the canvas and the composition. So you'll see this composition is smaller than the other one we were working at, and basically the size of this is determined by what's set up in Photoshop. So if I just go into the image menu here, image size, you can see that this document is 600 wide by 800 high, sort of like a web format if you like, and in After Effects that's what it is. So if you're in Photoshop and you set up HDTV canvas, when you import as a new project, create a new project and import, the composition in After Effects will default to that. So that's how you set the composition sizes in After Effects. Now if you wanted to, you could change this size, or if you needed to tweak it, you can do in After Effects. And you'll notice there's a composition option here. If you go into composition settings, it'll show you. So here you can see we've got the size of this composition set, but there are also some presets, and if you go in there you've got all the specific sizes for different outputs. And just to give you a quick run through, so we've got web video options up here, then we've got NTSC, which is an American format, so don't use NTSC unless you're in the States. It runs at a different frame rate. If you have an After Effects project with NTSC and run it on European equipment, it won't work. PAL, which is an older European format, generally not HD, and then we have the HD TV options that we were using down here. So generally, if you're working for HD and in Europe, it'll be one of these options down here. For this example, we're just going to stick with 600, 800, it's quite easy. Here there's a frame rate, so you can change that here. Generally, you're looking at 25 frames a second. And then we have a time code and duration. We won't worry about time code, but in the duration here you'll see that there's a 10 and then 00. This says 10 seconds, so it's 10 seconds and then frames. So you can be quite specific in duration, right down to the frame. We don't worry about frames generally, we're just going to deal in seconds. So here, and then you can choose a default background color for your composition. So we have a 6x800 canvas, and we have our layers, and if you remember in the last tutorial, if we click down here, there are some transform controls for this object. So the ball layer, if I zoom out a bit and just move the ball there, you can see off canvas, sorry, you'll see that these numbers change. So next to the position, this is your X and Y coordinates. So I've moved the ball off the canvas and you can see the Y coordinate is -142, so it's off the canvas. So what we're going to do is just work with this layer and imitate a ball dropping to the ground and then bouncing up. And how we do that is put in special frames to tell After Effects when there's a change in position or state for the layer. So every time a layer changes direction or size or opacity or something happens to that layer, a keyframe tells the program, okay, from this point do something different. So we need to work with keyframes to say, okay, change position or size or whatever. So to start with, we just look at the position option here, and there's a little stopwatch there next to the transform control. If you just click that, you'll notice a little yellow diamond appears. That's a keyframe. And then if we say, okay, we want the ball to drop from here to the ground in 2 seconds, the way to do it is just to roll the playhead down. It's this little yellow thing on the top here, down to 2 seconds. And then what's quite nice about After Effects, you can just grab the object and pull it down, and it will put a keyframe in automatically. And if you want the ball to drop straight while you're dragging, just hold down Shift. Okay, so as it hits the ground, there's a keyframe there, and you'll see the value now is 638. So if we just roll the playhead here, you'll see that that drop happens between -142 and 638. So those are the keyframes. So After Effects is saying keyframe 1 start at -142, 2 be at 638, and then everything in between that, it'll work out what the distance is frame by frame, and we call this a tween. Okay, so at that point you want the ball to be here, and then let's just say 1.5 seconds further on, you want the bounce to go up. Okay, so we're doing this. So it's fairly straightforward. So that gives you an idea of what keyframes do. They're basically markers for changes. And then the thing between the keyframes we call tweens. So, and this is the same in any animation software you use. So if you're using Flash or Toon Boom or whatever, these concepts are universal, keyframes and tweens. And tween is just short for in-betweening. So if you want to preview this, you can just press the spacebar, and what will happen is the animation will run slowly for the first draft. So what it will do is it will write all that data into RAM. You'll see this green line appear, and then in the second draft, so when it runs through a second time, it'll run through more or less at real time. After Effects isn't perfect for real time. The timeline doesn't often play at real time. There is an option up here you'll see in preview for what we call a RAM preview. This will run as close to real time as it can, so if you press that little play button there, that green line says okay, pre-rendered, and then it runs off RAM. So here we go. Okay, so we've got a basic animation. Now if you want to, you can play with speed quite quickly. So one thing you'll work out quite quickly is that the speed is dictated by how far apart these are. And if you want to zoom into the timeline, there's a little mountain range at the bottom you can see, you can zoom in. So let's just say we want the bounce to be over and done with quicker, so we want the motion quicker. We can just drag those keyframes, just grab them in the timeline and drag them together like this. And then if we just press spacebar, let it run through once. Or press RAM preview. There, that's much quicker. Okay, so that's generally how it works. It's not too complicated. We can just put in keyframes. And the thing to remember is that you start with the first frame as a stopwatch, and then you roll the playhead and then change the state, and it will put a keyframe in automatically. So just to go through that again, if you want to, we can work with scale. So here I've just rolled the playhead back to the beginning, click on the stopwatch for scale, roll down a second, and let's just say we want the size to increase. This time I can just click on the 100% here and increase, and you'll see it gets bigger as it drops. And then to animate further, I can roll out and on here drag to decrease, and away you go. So the beauty is that put the first keyframe in and then roll the timeline and physically move or change the parameters related to that layer, and it'll automatically put a keyframe in for you. And then if you want to change the speed, you just move these keyframes around. So it's quite hands-on. It's a really nice way to animate. There are other options here for opacity, rotation, etc. And for the sake of the project, we're not looking for anything too complicated. It's really an introduction to how this works. So these basic controls are fine to experiment with now, and I'd suggest just having a go and playing around with keyframes and how they work.